Headstrong, violent. No use of the mind God gave. Headstrong, violent. Headstrong, violent. No use of the mind God gave you.
All right. Before we get into this next segment, I want to play a video here from our energy secretary. This is Christopher Wright. For those of you just connecting with us on social media, this is the first time in the history of our federal government we have ever had an energy secretary who worked in the energy industry. Imagine that, if you will. Liberals generally pick a college professor to be the energy secretary when Democrats are in charge, and Republicans tend to pick a governor from an energy-friendly state. Texas, Rick Perry, for example, the Dakotas, that kind of thing. The first time we ever got an actual guy from the energy industry to be our energy secretary, it was right now, and this is him.
So energy matters. It matters for human lives. It matters for human well-being. It matters for low-income people and social mobility, low-income people to come up. When you hear crazy stuff today, check it out, dig a little deeper. Hurricanes are not growing. That's in the IPCC report. Tornadoes are actually on the decline. Floods, droughts, all of these things you hear ceaselessly, they just simply aren't so. It isn't even controversial that they're not so. But media, politicians just continually abuse these facts. And I'll end with one last fact, because anxiety is growing among kids. I'm sure everyone has seen that. 20% of kids go to bed at night worried about climate change. Your chance of dying from extreme weather today is greater than 95, has been reduced by more than 97% over the last century. There's just an absolute plummeting from 500,000 people a year dying from extreme weather to less than 10,000 the last couple of years, while the world population has quadrupled. So facts matter. Human liberty matters. Bottom-up social organization has always been the way to a better world. Let's resist this force of top-down control that's not benefiting humans except those in government.
All right, so that is your energy. That's Christopher Wright. The first time we've ever had an energy secretary that actually understood the industry that he was presiding over. Hi, everybody. I'm Kenny Webster. If you're just getting connected on social media, good to be with you here this afternoon. Morning, depending on where you are in the country. We're live streaming on social media while we are also on the radio. KPRC 950 in Houston, Texas, the oldest radio station in Houston. And we dual stream on 94.53 HD FM. Of course, a lot of you just listen on the internet, and that's great if you subscribe to the podcast. Funny story about me, so I can introduce our next guest. Not long ago, my neighbor across the hall, Keith, is a good buddy of mine. he and I went through our divorce at the same time. Not the point of the story, but Keith tells me recently, hey, I'm going to be leaving for a few months. I'm renting out my condo to this guy. He's a little younger than you. He's about your age. His name's Jesse. I was like, what does Jesse do for a living? He goes, well, he does TED Talks. I was like, all right, go on. I said he's an advocate for sustainable energy. I was like, I hate this guy. And then he goes on to say, hang on a minute. No, he's a good guy. He doesn't agree with climate change activists. He's actually he's for sustainable energy. He's against people politicizing sustainable energy. Thought, all right, I want to meet Jesse. Jesse shows up at some point, and Jesse, you're an unusual character to have on the radio show because you're not selling a book, although you are an author. You're not promoting some podcast, although you are a public speaker. You're not really selling anything, which usually is when people come in and do the radio show, they're trying to sell tickets to their comedy show or they're trying to convince me to help them promote their political campaign. You're just a guy who thinks that climate change activists have ruined environmentalism. Would you say that's a fair... Was that a fair explanation of who you are and what you believe?
I think my thesis is more around sustainable chemicals. And my goal here is to help people become more aware of the chemicals they're using every day and how those chemicals might impact their brain chemistry, their gut biome, and their hormone production. Wow.
That's not, so you're kind of an RFK Jr. guy. I mean, what did you think about you just watched that clip with our Energy Secretary, Christopher Wright. Did you disagree with anything he said?
It's not, in thesis, I don't disagree with anything he said. In my conversations, I never use words like climate change, climate crisis, global warming. We have 50% of the population that doesn't necessarily believe that, quote unquote, carbon is the problem. And so what I try to do is ground the conversation in reality. And the reality is, in order to create energy independence today, we have to extract resources. And extracting resources creates what are called externalities. And so when you extract these resources, you're using a linear model. You extract the resources, you produce, you consume, you discard. And what I would like to see happen in our society is a more circular model.
My problem with the advocates for renewable energy or renewable chemicals or whatever, more often than not, these are people from wealthy communities, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, the Greta Thunbergs of the world. They're from first world developed countries. They have affluence. They go hang out at the United Nations, and they don't want poor countries like Kenya to have access to oil and gas. They don't want coal-burning power plants in third world countries. And they get to live in a country that benefited from these things. The problem is there is no other way we can have cheap energy right now at this point in time without so-called fossil fuels, which isn't even a scientific word. It's a term that activists branded on it. We have a choice right now. We can have cheap, plentiful energy and have humans continue to exist, or we can rely entirely off of solar panels and windmills and humans will die. And it really is that extreme right now, right? I like nuclear energy. I think nuclear energy is the most logical. It's the most eco-friendly. One rock of uranium gives you as much energy as if we filled up the entire Wrigley Field with all the coal we had. Fill an entire sports stadium with coal. That's as much energy as you get from one rock of uranium. The problem is everybody's terrified of nuclear energy. I don't know why. We can count all the nuclear disasters on one hand. You'd still have 3 fingers left. 4 if you grew up near a nuclear power plant, but that's besides the point. And, 3 Mile Island, right? Fukushima. What's the other one?
And this
Chernobyl.
It's important to note what you're talking about is fission, not fusion. Fusion is super sustainable, clean, limitless, low-cost energy.
I thought fusion was when you took hip-hop and house music and you combined them together. It's not what that's something else.
That's called trendy.
Okay, no, you're right. So, but to your point, though, what you're advocating for isn't necessarily something political, right?
No.
It's just the idea that at some point these things can become more affordable. Thomas Massie is one of my favorite lawmakers from Kentucky. He's an advocate for, self-sustainability. I love the idea of that. I live in a city in a high-rise. I know that makes it seem like I'm not for those things, but I think it's cool that you can go out to the middle of the desert, set up solar panels and dig a well and just survive out there if you know what the hell you're doing. But that's not going to keep billions of people alive, is it?
No, it's not. And it's what we need to realize as a society is when we extract resources like petroleum, so oil, coal, natural gas, we create pollution. And there's a lot of pollutants that are created through the extraction of these resources. And so when you look at different pollutants, things like mercury or arsenic, I don't think you'd give your kid inhaler full of arsenic or mercury. Maybe your ex-wife, but not not your kid.
I mean, some liberals, if they didn't have access to abortion in their country, state, would probably do that, but most would not. Yeah.
Most would not, right? So if we can agree that expanding production in a way that increases the amount of arsenic and mercury in our environment, and that's land, air, water, plants, animals, anything that's living and breathing.
Okay.
If we can agree that the expansion of these pollutants isn't good, then we can also agree that reducing the amount of those pollutants in the environment would be a good thing.
Okay, I'm against pollution. I think pollution's bad. What I don't like is junk science, fake science.
Totally.
We have all these subsidies put in place by the Biden administration, put in place by the state of California, that were supposed to make everybody want to go out and buy an EV. And all it did was make EVs more expensive and ultimately make them less popular. What is it? Ford loses something like $20,000, $30,000 for every Ford F1 Lightning that they sell. That's crazy. Now we learned this week from the Wall Street Journal. Well, this is from last week, but whatever. GM had an EV plant. They've decided not to have one anymore. They're now scaling it. They spent something like $300 million on an EV plant. Now they've realized actually that was a bad idea. Now they're going to pump another $888 million into it to convert it into a V8 engine plant. They are backpedaling on EV. It's kind of funny, right? But also it's a sign of the times, Jesse. EVs were a bad investment. People don't want to buy them.
There was a big softening of demand, and that's what they're citing. But what's really interesting to me is the contradiction between GM's new announcement and a lot of their climate goals. 1 million units a year by 2025 for EVs, carbon neutral across global operations by 2040, zero emission light duty vehicle sales by 2035, 100% EV sales by 2035.
Okay.
So if you're building a plant with ICE engines, ICE being internal combustion engines, and you're expanding that production by 888 million, the likelihood that you're going to be at 100% EVs by 2035 is zero.
Okay, so the plan in California is to punish people for having these vehicles and actually outlaw them or ban them or pay a tax penalty, that sort of thing. I'm guessing that you're not an advocate for that.
No, and look, I spent 5 years in Detroit. My last company was a sustainable chemicals company, and a lot of Detroit is focused on the energy transition and electric vehicles. So there's a couple key concerns that I think your listeners might find interesting in terms of electric vehicles. I'll kind of broadly speaking break them into 3 branches.
Concern number 1, they're not sexy. Women are not impressed by an EV. Women will not, you will not get laid if you're driving an EV, probably.
That's totally possible.
Right.
Not necessarily where I was going with it, but yeah, I think there's a lack of sex appeal in EVs. But I would break it broadly speaking into 3 things: the materials, the energy, and the weight. The materials for a battery, most notably cobalt, come from places like the Democratic Republic of Congo. In fact, 70% of the cobalt supply chain comes from DRC.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's child labor.
Child labor, forced labor, slave labor.
Yeah.
So
progress.
Every single EV that you use has some form of child labor, forced labor, or slave labor. There is no way around it today. That is one of the materials problems that's in EVs. The energy problem, what most people don't realize, is when you go charge your EV at a charging station, most of that power is still coal or natural gas. So you're not really doing anything different. You're changing your input feedstock from oil or petroleum into coal. So you're not really eliminating emissions, you're just shifting emissions. The third implication that a lot of people don't think about is the weight. The average electric vehicle is 20 to 40% heavier.
Is that why, have you noticed that the Cybertrucks all look like they have plastic hubcaps? I've wondered, why don't they have metal hubcaps?
I don't know. It's a great question.
It got to be the weight.
The weight. So the weight's a big problem, not only because your tires wear faster, which is increasing the amount of microplastics in the environment, if you care about that type of thing, but also look at our parking structures. Our parking structures were not graded for electric vehicles. They were graded for internal combustion engines. So if your cars weigh 20, 30, 40% more, the average parking structure that was made decades ago cannot withstand a full garage full of electric vehicles.
Wow, that's fascinating to me, or that the highways aren't equipped for it. My concern is if we switch from metal hubcaps and rims on cars to the plastic stuff, how will we get more microplastics in our testicles?
If you want more microplastics in your testicles, just keep drinking out of plastic bottles.
That's what we're going to do. Okay. Hey, can you hang with us for another segment? Do you need to run? What's going on? Let's do another quick one real quick. More with Jesse Henry right after this. What's the book called?
The Millennial Merger.
Millennial Merger. Stick around.
Pursuit of Happiness Radio.
This is Kenny Webster's Pursuit of Happiness on KPRC 950, Houston.
if you're just getting connected to this, you are watching a live recording session of some segments that will air later this afternoon on KPRC 950 here in Houston, Texas. I'm hanging out with Jesse Henry. Quick reminder, a week from this Friday, right? So, a week and a few days, I'm going to be doing stand-up comedy in Tomball, Texas with Chad Prather and Jesse Payton. You can find a link to that at the top of my Twitter account, but if you're not on X or Twitter or whatever it is you choose to call it, the venue for that is, what is it called? I'm ashamed I don't remember the name of it. I should know this. Here we go. District 249. That's what it's called in Tomball, Texas. Did y'all know that Tomball, Texas is named after a guy named Tom Ball? I didn't know that. And someone told me that on X earlier. I had no idea. Anyway, you can get your tickets right now at jesseisfunny.com, watchchad.com. I'm told that's going to sell out very soon. So get tickets to that if you do want to go. Anyway, stick around. We're going to keep this show going right now. So don't go anywhere. Stay connected. All right. A new report claims that 6% of Americans don't like their first name. I'm guessing that number is going to grow as Elon's kids get older and realize what he's done to them. I'm kidding. I like Elon Musk. Did y'all notice he's got a black eye right now? And he blamed that on his little baby. What's a 5-year-old that he had with Grimes, the electro pop musician? I think the baby's name is Xerox or something like that. And I don't believe that story for a second. I don't think that's real. I don't think that's how he got a black eye. But that being said, my guest right now is Jesse Henry. In studio right now, founded a sustainable materials company. He is a chemical industry consultant, a public speaker. He is an author. And Jesse, Elon Musk, good for the planet or bad for the planet? Bottom line me.
Good for the planet overall. If you look at his models on sustainable abundance and what he's doing for electrification of vehicles, which I know we just talked about, solar energy, interplanetary travel, I think broadly speaking, it's really hard to argue that his model on sustainable abundance is not beneficial for the future of humanity.
Well, broadly speaking, he seems to sleep with a lot of broads, so that's...
He does.
Yeah.
He's got a sustainable supply chain of women that want to be impregnated by him.
I think Elon's a cool guy. Nobody's perfect. I think Elon's done more good than bad. Still not going to drive a Tesla.
Yeah.
It is weird to me though when people on the left tell me they don't like Elon Musk. Or even they'll tell me like they think he's not as smart as people think. Nobody figured out EVs, how to commercialize it. Nobody figured out how to commercialize space travel. Him and his buddy Peter Thiel came up with PayPal. That's brilliant. Like commerce on the internet is basically a thing that they figured out. But of all the things that they write off, isn't Neuralink the most interesting? They're figuring out how to cure paralysis and blindness. Name a person that's doing that.
No one. And it's hard to argue that the guy's got, I think it's 6 multi-billion-dollar companies, and he does a lot for society. His model actually, Kenny, is every week he focuses on solving the most difficult problem in each of his companies. And so after 52 weeks, he solved the 52 most important problems in each of his 6 companies. The guy's doing a lot and he's tackling a lot, and this is why his companies are doing so well.
Boring Company is the lesser known one. That's the company that came up with the flamethrowers. That's like his hobby company. Starlink, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink. What am I leaving out?
So he bought Solar City, which is now
that's right. Yeah.
Which is now a part of Tesla, but Tesla has its own solar division at this point.
Okay, so he is probably, if we believe, in climate change theory, which I don't, but he's probably the biggest environmentalist or climate change activist on Earth, if you will. And even he has admitted that we need to expand drilling. If we don't do it, somebody else will, and that somebody's going to be OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Russia as a petrostate. Some have argued that by getting rid of the sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline, it gave Russia the monetary power they needed to invade Ukraine. There's a whole war there that probably wouldn't have been happening. Some have argued that Hamas might not have invaded Israel on October 7th, 2023, if not for the fact that Iran started making more money off of oil and gas because Joe Biden scaled it back. Elon Musk, an advocate for solar panels, an advocate for environmentalism, clearly has pointed out even he thinks we need to expand drilling. And now the Trump administration is convinced that a massive Alaska energy project will find investors. They're going to do exactly that. Big announcement this week. Let me see if I can find the Trump administration is opening up 13 million Alaska acres to mining and drilling. Now, is that enough? I think there's more we could do with Alaska. I think kind of like how the Soviets used Siberia to hold all the Nazi war criminals. Maybe we could keep illegal immigrants in North Alaska. I don't know, but that's a different conversation altogether. What do you think about this, Jesse? Because you're a critic of oil and gas, but you admit, kind of like Elon, there's a need for it. You're objective. You know, it's not a political approach. It's a philosophical approach, kind of like Alex Epstein. There's something to be said for that, isn't there?
Yeah, and look, we're in the Mecca. We're in Houston. This is where the energy and the materials transition meet. But overall, I'm not supporting expanding oil and gas drilling and extraction of resources. I think we need, as a society, to figure out how to create energy independence beyond the extraction and pollution that we have lived by since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at the Department of Energy's billion-ton report, they showed that there's 1 billion tons of agriculture waste that's sitting on American farms today. We have 900 million acres of American farms. And when you eat an ear of corn, you got to realize that corn grew on a stalk. That stalk is 6 feet tall, and it grew 2 ears of corn. So the percentage of biomass that we actually use in the corn supply chain is very light, 10, 20%. The other 80%, it gets burned. That is all input. That is all feedstock that can be used to create chemicals, and it can be used to create materials that we can use in everyday products.
Okay, so this is a little different than ethanol and stuff like that, right?
Ethanol is probably the most common chemical that we use on a day-to-day basis that is produced from bio-based feedstocks that the average consumer is familiar with.
People have pointed out, though, that by doing the ethanol subsidies, it actually made things worse.
We subsidize everything. The idea of a free market is kind of BS in today's world. We subsidize the oil industry. We subsidize the agriculture industry. There is really no large industry today that doesn't operate without any type of subsidy.
Okay, so with all that being said, I get your point here on sustainable. I don't disagree with the points that you're making. I think the idea of having more energy is great. I just don't think that it should be at the expense of something else. Obviously, I don't dislike solar panels. I just hate junk science. I hate when people make this argument that is ready to replace oil and gas. It's not. The costs are astronomical, like you explained, child slave labor. Windmills are kind of the same thing. These things have a 20, 30-year lifespan, and then they're not recyclable. As an advocate for sustainable energy or sustainable anything, that's got to drive you nuts because it does the opposite of what they're selling it to do.
And because I'm in the sector, there actually are a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how to recycle wind turbine blades, solar panels. There's so many recycling supply chains that have popped up as a byproduct of, hey, we produce a lot of textiles. Let's figure out how to recycle them.
Okay. Greta Thunberg, are you familiar with child activist?
I am familiar with Greta, yes.
Greta Thunberg is an autistic teenager. I guess she's a young adult now who dropped out of high school to become a science expert without knowing anything about science. I have no problem with people that are on the spectrum. Jesse, I'm probably on the spectrum a little bit. But Greta Thunberg is this person who latched onto a little bit of information. She's clearly been brainwashed. We've learned that her family is part of the UN, that they're members of the Climate Change Committee at the UN. And now we've learned, weirdly enough, Greta Thunberg is on this boat, and she's traveling right now to Gaza. And I don't know if you've watched this yet. I find this fascinating. I thought this video had audio with it. I guess it doesn't. Okay, Greta Thunberg. There we go.
Today, about a month after our latest attempt to go on with this mission, the boat was bombed twice. All evidence suggests Israel. And we are doing this because we have to keep our promise to the Palestinians to do everything in our power to protest against the genocide and to try to open up the humanitarian corridor and break the siege.
All right, so she's on this boat, and they claim it's a climate-friendly boat. You're probably wondering what this even has to do with you. She's a famous climate change activist who has now been brainwashed into being led off on a ship to Gaza, where she's going to bring aid to, there's 2 million people there. She's on a boat with 30 people. Doesn't this kind of speak to how these young people have been misled with dangerous information that's maybe doing more harm than good? I mean, when she gets to Gaza, she's going to get beheaded by Hamas, right? I mean, what chance does this woman? And earlier we looked at those statistics. 20% of young people go to sleep at night and lose sleep over fear of climate change. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation from people in the sustainable energy world not just related to sustainable energy, but look at what it's doing to this poor young woman.
Yeah, and that fear is called climate alarmism, and it's actually showing increases in rates of depression in Gen Z right now. I mean, I think even if Greta is well-intentioned, the language, climate change, climate crisis, global warming, these are terms that immediately turn off 50% of the population. And so if we're going to really transition into the evolution of humanity and capitalism, we really have to zoom out and say, what is a solution that works for 80% of the people, 100% of the people? And using terms like climate change isn't the path, Kenny. Like, climate change is the world is changing. If there's one thing that's consistent on planet Earth, it is change.
Sure.
The way the Democrats have framed climate change does not appeal to 50% of the voters. So if everyone that was talking about climate change and climate crisis and global warming switched to talking about pollution, now we can get 80+% of the electorate on board with why pollution is bad and how to solve for pollution.
See, anti-pollution, I'm an advocate for it. Like telling people this is causing hurricanes, I think that's grossly misleading. I think it's dangerously misinformed, and misinformation is only going to push people away from this stuff. Next week, Jesse, the UN is hosting a climate emergency meeting. Imagine, if you will, 10,000 climate activists will jet off to the French Riviera in planes, many of them flying private. My friend Daniel Turner, an advocate for the energy industry, asked the question, if the climate crisis is real, why aren't they having these meetings on Zoom? Why are they going to the French Riviera as if we don't know the answer?
It's a great question. And this happens with the World Economic Forum. This happens with all these big conferences where the billionaires take their private jets in and then they sit there and point fingers and say how we're not doing enough as citizens. But we need to shift our model. It gets back to a linear model versus a circular model. And there's companies out there in aviation, for example, if we want to go down that rabbit hole, that are powering planes with hydrogen. That is an amazing, amazing opportunity. I don't think electric is the way to go, but there's a huge market also for sustainable aviation fuel. So there are people in each of these sectors that are trying to make moves.
Would you fly in a hydrogen-powered plane?
Absolutely.
My uncle designs helicopters for a living, and he won't get in one.
Really?
You're a very trustworthy person to make that point. I don't know. I don't know if I would myself, but it's an interesting question to ask. Jesse, I think you and I advocate for different things, but I agree with the points you're making. I don't think you're wrong about any of this stuff. I want less pollution. I think most conservatives, right-wingers, libertarians, I think we want less pollution. We don't want to believe that we're putting toxic sludge into things.
Totally.
The Maha movement proves there's plenty of right-wing Republicans that agree with the points that you're making. Most people don't draw that line between the food that we eat and the chemicals being created from the energy industry. That's your entire world, right?
Yeah.
You're a Maha guy.
I am a Maha guy. Regardless of my support or lack thereof for any political party, I do support removing toxicity from pharma, food, agriculture, chemical sector. These are overall good things. If you don't support removing toxicity from these sectors, why?
I know, I agree.
Question.
I don't even like that System of a Down song. I think it sucks. I get your point. Jesse, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, what can they do?
They could go to jessehenry.co to see more about me and my personal site. If you're looking to understand more about the chemicals that you use every day, you can download an app called Yuka, Y-U-K-A. You can go to yuka.io and you can scan the barcodes on any supermarket to find out more about the toxicity of the ingredients that you're using every day. If you're looking at your hand soap, your deodorant, your toothpaste, your mouthwash, and you're wondering, are these things good for me? I encourage you to go to a website, ewg.org/skin deep, and type in that chemical into the ewg.org search engine and figure out what are the ingredients in this product, what are these ingredients doing to my body, and are there more sustainable alternatives that could support my long-term health?
Jesse, you're a very different guy than the person I hung out with last weekend at a rock show when we were watching a bunch of goth girls drink tequila and throw up all over themselves.
A little different.
Right on, my man. And are you on social media? You must be, right?
I am on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram sometimes. So just type in Jesse Henry, JESSEHENRY, and find me there.
My brother. Hey, to the rest of you, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, I will be at Tomball at, District 249 a week from this Friday. Find Great Walton and Johnson and Pursuit of Happiness Radio merch at ilovewj.com. You can always subscribe to our podcast. You can follow me on social media by searching for Kenny Webster. Have an awesome afternoon. We'll be back bright and early tomorrow morning for more of What You Bought a Radio For.
listening to the Pursuit of Happiness Radio. Tell the government to kiss your